Hi, hello and welcome. My name is Lottie, aka Sneezy Ferret, and the debate that I've been waiting for, and probably you too, in regards to the petition against digital ID is here. It happened yesterday and is nearly 4 hours long. So what I've done is I've went through all of the footage for you, put together a much more palatable short version, or at least I hope you think so, with all the most informative, interesting and entertaining bits. Now, that said, if you do want to go and watch the debate for yourself in full, then I will link it for you in the description, but please note you do need a link to be able to watch the video, because for some reason Parliament has this video unlisted, meaning that you cannot just find it. This is one you need a link to be able to access. And that's odd because all other e-petition debates are available as listed videos. Now, before we get into the footage itself, one thing I'd like to mention is just the sheer amount of turnout there was for MPs. In fact, there were more MPs than there were chairs for once, leading a couple of them to comment that this really should have taken place in the main chamber rather than in a side room, especially given the amount of public interest in this. I happen to agree. So, let's get into the actual footage itself.
I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 730194 relating to the introduction of mandatory digital ID cards. It is a pleasure to open the debate today on behalf of the Petitions Committee, and can I thank all organisations and individuals that I have met with in preparation for the debate. Sir Edward, nearly 3 million people have signed today's petition. It is the fourth most signed petition in the history of parliamentary e-petitions, comparable only to the recent petitions calling for a general election. It is obvious why the plans to bring in digital ID have provoked such an outrage. They are fundamentally un-British and strike at the core political traditions in this country. There are colleagues from all parties opposed to these measures: the Conservatives, the Greens, Reform, Lib Dems, Labour backbenchers, the SNP, Plaid Cymru, independent MPs and colleagues from Northern Ireland. In fact, even several ministers in this government have in the past voiced their opposition to compulsory identity documents, and I will give way.
Thank you, for the avoidance of doubt, Sir Edward, I'm only on this side of the House, because it's the Westminster Hall so packed, it's the only remaining chair. I have not defected to the Labour Party, and never will. Or to anyone else. Very quickly, can he confirm this was not in Labour's general election manifesto, so they have absolutely no electoral mandate to extend the surveillance state over the people of this country with this gimmick?
Sir Edward, I could not agree with my right honourable friend enough. So that begs the question: who actually is in favour of these proposals other than the Prime Minister himself? Despite the consistent opposition to identity documents, this is not the first time that they have been forced on the British public. The first ID card in this country came during the Second World War, with cards that could be demanded from the public by a police officer, subject to 6 months imprisonment if not shown. Despite promises at the time, in 1939, the ID cards would be a temporary wartime measure. They were still used throughout post-war Attlee government and only ended, Sir Edward, by the Conservatives in 1952. 50 years later, no longer fighting German spies but the war on terror, the Blair government tried and succeeded in bringing in ID cards back. Only once again, it took the Conservative government, this time in coalition with the Lib Dems, to stop them. Sadly, the Conservatives are unfortunately not wholly innocent when it comes to ID either. In 2021, the government introduced the first digital ID in the form of COVID passports, something that I proudly voted against. Thankfully, these documents only lasted a short while before restrictions were lifted. Which finally brings us on to the modern day and the latest excuse for ID cards: tackling illegal immigration and delivering on government services. And I will give way to the...
Order. Can I just say that you may have noticed there's a huge number of people trying to speak, and I'm going to have to impose a 3-minute limit, and we'll try and get everybody in. But of course, the more interventions there are, some people will simply not get in. So perhaps you can all bear that in mind, please. Thank you. Okay. Carry on.
Thank you, Sir Edward. I will keep my intervention very, very short because there were 4,400 of my constituents signed this petition, which is really quite unheard of for that number. And I think they are very, very clear. They do not want the imposition, because that's what this will be, of digital ID. And as we've heard from the history lesson, you know, time and time again, it's the Conservatives that have come and said, no, we do not want this. The British people do not want it. Isn't it time that this government actually sat up and listened to the public for a change?
And Sir Edward, that is exactly why this Conservative government, this Conservative Party is saying no to digital ID once again. And the latest guesstimate of how much this is going to cost us all, a whopping £1.8 billion. I will give way.
As the member so powerfully articulated, I know my constituents will agree with him that there is much, much better things that we could be doing with £1.8 billion than wasting on a project like this.
And I entirely agree, Sir Edward. But here we are with the latest government's excuse to introduce mandatory digital ID. You can just see communication advisors in number 10, looking at today's polling, dusting off the old ID card plan and slapping "Stop the Boats" on the cover. Indeed, there is no doubt in my mind that had the number one issue of today been tackling potholes, the very same press release would have come out of number 10, claiming digital ID was now the essential reason for tackling the national problem of potholes. So I say this in jest, but just to point out that it seems that any excuse will do, however unjustified and unevidenced, just to push policy through. And I will give way to the Chair of the Select Committee.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member greatly for giving way. And I want to say that there are many who do seek the ability to identify themselves, who do not have that as it stands. And I think we all have constituents who are experiencing that. My committee has seen evidence, though, that the figure that has been quoted by the Honourable Gentleman is not recognised by the Secretary of State So it's not recognised by the Secretary of State. It's been put forward by the OBR, and she will be writing to us to set out what costs she sees and when they will be realised. It's also very important to recognise that the level of digital hygiene across government is not such as could support, in my view, a digital ID scheme which is mandatory.
And Sir Edward, there lies all of the explanations and the reasoning as to why there is so many in this House that are opposed to the plans that are being brought forward by the Prime Minister. But here's the question they hope that nobody will ask. If the real target is people who are here illegally, then why on earth do 67 million British citizens who already have national insurance numbers, passports, driving licences and birth certificates need to be dragged into a brand new compulsory database as well? What exactly is it about stopping the crisis of inflatable dinghies in the Channel that requires your son, your daughter, your dad, your 90-year-old grandma to hand over her data and facial geometry to the Home Office server? And I will give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. My constituents in Epping Forest are deeply concerned about the prospect of digital ID cards. Many have written and spoken to me, and over 5,600 have signed the petition. Rather than improving the delivery of public services, this scheme actually risks wasting billions on a complex, intrusive and potentially very insecure system that will not help anyone. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the Labour government must listen now, take on board the public concerns and scrap this flawed policy?
And my honourable friend makes an absolute point, because the reason is this is not about stopping the boats at all. This is about more government state control. I will give way, and then I'm going to make some progress.
Order. The mover must make progress, all right?
I will be very brief. Will the honourable member agree with me, coming from one of the constituencies in rural Wiltshire, where a huge number of residents have been part of this petition, that digital exclusion is a reality in areas like mine?
I absolutely agree, sir, that digital exclusion exclusion is a reality for all. So I ask everyone in this place and those that are watching at home, no matter your political persuasion, imagine your worst ever government. No, one that keeps you awake at night, one that you would march in the streets for. To many, I am sure it will be this government, but to some it may have been previous. This single piece of digital infrastructure hands them, whoever they may be, the key to your life. Yeah. And once that digital infrastructure is set up, we cannot go back. Once digital ID comes into force, no political party can promise its intentions will stay good forever. Put simply, an ID card gives the state permanent control, and I say no. Now, the slippery slope argument is one so common in debates around civil liberties. It's almost a cliche. But once we have the digital identity infrastructure in place, it will become so much harder for a well-meaning minister to resist the idea that they can fix areas of public policy by tracking and controlling an ever finer level of how a population behaves. And I will give way.
I'm grateful to my old friend for giving way. We have a government that couldn't even keep their own budgets under wraps. What hope have they got with our personal data?
And Sir Edward, that is exactly what a constituent of mine emailed me about, and they were a constituent that voted Labour in 2024 and have said to me, if they can't even control the leakage from the government, how on earth can they control our data? And I will give way, and that will be the final intervention for the time being.
Extremely grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I, like many, have been absolutely inundated by Hartlepool constituents who are hugely concerned about this. Does he agree with me that part of the problem here is that we got an announcement without the detail? I've written to the Minister with a number of questions put to me by our constituents. Do you think government ministers owe our constituents answers on the details of what they're actually proposing?
I couldn't agree with the honourable member enough, and I suspect the Minister will be coming out reiterating lines that he was given from the Prime Minister before this debate. And just look at the social credit system in China. Facial recognition linked to ID penalises people. Blacklisted citizens cannot buy train or plane tickets, book hotels or apply for certain jobs. This government has already indicated that migration, work and renting will be tied to ID. But how long will it be before future governments push further and accessing state services is brought under the control and monitoring of digital ID? We are already seeing signs of this framework within the School and Children's Wellbeing Bill, the Online Safety Act and the One Login system. Combined with a formal digital ID, these frameworks would create a world of control for Whitehall and a soulless dystopia for the rest of us. Together, they replace the honesty of decency of human-to-human interaction with opaque, mechanical, computer-says-no future. The scary truth is that the appeal of control and ID cards lies within anyone who has access to power, and it takes conscious effort in every one of us to resist this temptation. Power does corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and I will give way.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Wouldn't he agree that if bad employers are not prevented from taking people on with national insurance numbers, or if they don't have their passports, they're not going to stop at taking someone on without digital ID?
Again, I agree with the honourable member in the points that he is making. The attitude of control strikes at the very heart of our political traditions. We are a representative democracy, not a command and control state. Government exists by the will of the people, not the other way round. Put simply, we are not a papers-please society. One of the most terrifying elements of the government's proposals are that these IDs are to be digital. The national database that our identities are to be held on is a true honeypot for hackers all over the world. And to those that say it would be secure, I say to you, name me a company, a government body that hasn't had a hacking crisis in recent years. The NHS, the Co-op, Jaguar Land Rover, I could go on. Even Estonia's government lost 280,000 digital ID photos in 2021. And I will give way.
I thank him for giving way. Does he share my concerns that this scheme could put constituents' most sensitive data into the hands of private, perhaps overseas individuals who may have neither our constituents' nor our country's interests at heart?
Again, and I completely agree with the honourable member. Indeed, as the case of One Login, a cybersecurity specialist. Who were able to infiltrate and potentially alter the underlying code without being noticed by the team that they were working on the project. In fact, the existing system could be compromised as we speak. We are assured by advocates of digital ID that clever technology will protect the data. But as I've outlined already, there is temptation to further integrate data within the system will be extremely strong. So therefore, how will it be that someone suggests security features are removed to make a system more efficient? Digital data brings me back to consent. And on this point, I would like to finish, Sir Edward. Digital ID is an ever more intrusive evolution of traditional ID cards, one that promises to be more oppressive. Coupled with the powers of digital databases, increasing widespread facial recognition, digitalised public services, and looming prospect of a central bank digital currencies, digital ID threatens to create an all-encompassing digital surveillance state that even George Orwell's 1984 could not predict. In every aspect of public life, we give over our data with consent. Yet digital ID turns that notion on its head, insisting that we hand over data to simply function in society and potentially for reasons we cannot consent to in advance.
Well, thank you for that.
Final intervention, yeah.
One of my friends making a fantastic speech, but does he agree with me that this is just the latest example of this Labour government trying to push through something that was not in their manifesto, and therefore this House must do all it can to stop it from being a reality?
Again, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and therefore who else other than the Prime Minister is really wanting to drive this through? I doubt if the government expand the scope of digital ID after their initial implementation that they will be kind enough to offer an opt-out clause to anyone who has signed up. People up and down the country, 3 million who have signed today's petition, can see that this scheme is a disaster waiting to happen. I will give way to the chair of the Petitions Committee, and then that will be it.
As the chair of the Petitions Committee, I'd like to thank the honourable member for making an excellent speech. 3 million signatures. I want to apologise to everyone here for there not being enough space in here for the number of members who've turned up. I thank them for turning up. I think it poses a question for the House we must settle in the future.
And I couldn't agree more with that point. It just shows the strength of feeling on this issue. There are thousands deeply offended by the intrusion on their civil liberties, thousands sceptical that Whitehall will be able to pull off such a complex scheme, and thousands who are digitally excluded, terrified of computer says no future. So the government should give up now, because those on this side of the debate will never give up. Whether today's identity cards are stopped before they are implemented, the last few months, as they were in the last few months of 2010, or over a decade ago as they were in 1939, the British people will fight them. We will stop them and we will overturn them. Sir Edward, as I said to the government on the day that they announced this policy, I am not a tin of beans and I do not need a barcode.
So the opening comments by Robbie Moore are pretty much as I expected. He outlined how the digital ID is anti-democratic and anti-British and will inevitably lead to a surveillance state. Now, if not by this government, then certainly by another. Now, he also cited Lord Acton's quote regarding absolute power corrupting absolutely, and I think that's well placed. After all, as much as Labour tried to tell us that this will put the power over our personal data into our own hands, I don't think there's a lot of people out there actually buying that. After all, I don't think being forced into something unwanted is in any way empowering. Now, quite a few MPs mentioned just how much correspondence they've received from their constituents about this issue, and that's pretty telling as to how important this is to the general public, because let's face it, how many of us, even when we care deeply about something, actually bother emailing our MPs? So what I've done is I've put together a collection of different statements from MPs during the debate, and I'm going to start off with Jeremy Corbyn, who I have to tell you I did agree with him on every point during this. So, in fact, although I don't like him very much, just this statement here made me wish for a moment that he was Prime Minister instead of Keir Starmer. Just a moment, though.
Thank you very much, Sir Edward, and thank you for calling me to speak in this debate. And I think the numbers of members here and the demand for this debate shows two things. One is it should be held in the main chamber, not here. And secondly, that there is massive levels of public concern over the statement made by the Prime Minister. If I could just refer two quotes that I've received from my constituents, which I think summarise it very well. Digital ID is a deeply illiberal idea that threatens privacy, autonomy and the open access we should be standing for. It risks creating a two-tier Britain where access to basic services, healthcare, housing, employment, even voting, depends on whether someone has the right app, paperwork or digital trail. The second one, they entrench the presumption of suspicion, not trust, and put disproportionate burdens on the most vulnerable, migrants, the digitally excluded, the disabled, the elderly, and those without stable housing or documentation. Yes.
Well, he's making a very good case. I am utterly opposed to this, as are many of my constituents. But one of them has made this point to me, that in actual fact, our great liberty, our great freedom, that the state has to prove you guilty before you have to make a charge. So innocence before guilt. This reverses that, such that almost everybody on an ID card is assumed to have guilt until they have discharged themselves as innocent. Doesn't that break against all our freedoms?
I thank the member for the intervention. I think he's making an important point there, because the huge numbers that have signed this petition indicate to me that there are many in this country that are deeply concerned of the direction of travel in which we're going. ID cards is one thing. Restricting jury trial is another. Facial recognition at tube stations and now even in supermarkets is something that people find deeply disturbing. There's a whole vein of thought across the country where people are feeling a quite reasonable sense of paranoia about the levels of surveillance under which they're under at the present time. And I think members of Parliament would do well to try and understand that this attack on civil liberties, and that's what it is, means that vast amounts of information, utterly vast amounts of information on all of us will be stored, as they are already within the health service, which unfortunately the government is now making available to private healthcare interests at the same time. So there's a huge issue here about our data, our information and our privacy, which I think we would do well to remember. The last point I want to make is this. This debate is being pushed by commercial interests. Commercial interests who will make a great deal of money out of providing the necessary technical equipment to set up this surveillance system that will do very well out of it, and we are being pushed into agreeing it by them. I think it's time for members of Parliament to say, listen to what people are saying, listen to the concerns, have a proper debate in the chamber about this, and say no to the government, as we've said no before.
Thank you. Gregory Stafford.
Under your chairmanship, and apologies that due to business in the main chamber I may not be here for the wind-ups. Let me begin by restating my firm opposition to the introduction of mandatory digital ID. I opposed it in this chamber only a month ago, and the public response has been remarkable. The clip of my speech on social media has now been viewed over 2.5 million times, not because of any great oratory on my part, but because people across the country are deeply worried about the direction the government is taking. Worried about privacy, about freedom, and about the steady expansion of state power without consent. Will he work? I'm afraid I won't, sorry. Today I want to raise a specific issue that was touched on by my honourable friend, the member for Ilkley and Keighley, but is often missed in this debate, namely the provisions in the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which would mandate the NHS number as a single unique identifier for every child in England, namely ID cards, but on the sly. Ministers have confirmed in the House that this identifier will become mandatory. Wigan is already piloting multi-agency data sharing using it. Yet members of this elected chamber have not been given the evidence, the governance framework or the risk assessments that would justify such a change. The government has produced no credible reassurance that the NHS number will not become a gateway to expanded data sets or new intrusive linkages. No clear plan to prevent accidental disclosures that could put vulnerable children at risk, from revealing the address of a family fleeing domestic abuse, for example, or to exposing confidential adoption records. These are not theoretical concerns, they have occurred in practice. We have seen the warnings from Wales. Their NHS numbers were extracted centrally and sent to local authorities with no direct care relationship to the children concerned. The 2024 consultation was highly critical. The BMA, the Royal College of GPs and children's organisations all warned that such policies risk pushing marginalised families away from healthcare entirely. Wales's own Child Rights Impact Assessment warned of possible breaches of Articles 12 and 16 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and even warned that children could lose their Article 24 right to health if families disengage from the GP registration. Yet ministers insist that the NHS number is not sensitive data. The General Medical Council has already rejected that argument. All patient information attracts the common law duty of confidentiality. There is no such thing as a harmless identifier. Even practically, the Department for Education's own research warned that mandating NHS numbers will require significant investment, long-term planning and phased rollout. None of that groundwork has happened. Pilots are underway before Parliament has approved the principle. When trust in government is already scraping the floor, Sir Edward, the worst thing ministers could do is force through more mandatory digital ID for adults or for children, something the public neither asked for nor consented to. Nearly 3 million people have signed the petition. Over two-thirds of my constituents oppose it. Digital ID won't fix illegal migration, but it will supercharge state intrusion. The public deserve clarity, honesty and, above all, consent.
Let me start by saying that I think I'm the first person here who's actually a supporter of digital ID. However, I do agree with many of the objections raised by some colleagues. They are reasonable arguments and echo what many of my constituents have been telling me. Simon from Stowmarket wrote to say he's worried about the state using digital ID to micromanage people's lives. And John from Bury St Edmunds says digital ID could exclude those without smartphones or a fixed address. And there are many more concerned about the security of their data. And I may not just presently, but I do agree with all of this. But why do I support digital ID? Because I believe these arguments are about the practicalities of how we implement digital ID as opposed to the principle of whether we should have a digital ID in the first place. It should be entirely possible for a great country like ours to modernise the way in which its citizens interact with the state, whilst preserving civil liberties and privacy. And that is entirely the government's intention. No one will be stopped in the street and asked for digital ID. Data will be stored on personal devices, and it will be the individual's decision to share this or not. There will be alternative routes for those who cannot use smartphones. Nevertheless, I know some members will think this is a slippery slope. But that, again, is a practical argument. It's up to us, the legislators, and as a government to ensure that digital ID is implemented with safeguards against bureaucratic creep. But we should not forego the incredible benefits of digital ID because of the hypothetical chance that something we are against and can prevent might happen. And colleagues, those benefits would be incredible. Before entering this place, I was a surgeon for many years. The biggest problem I faced on a daily basis was accessing basic information about the patients. This is stored in piecemeal fashion across myriads of organisations. Now, we could use digital ID to create a unified record and give this to the patients to control. I think this would revolutionise the National Health Service, and this is just one potential use. I haven't mentioned the benefits for other public services and in reducing illegal working. People say this is hugely expensive. I say that digital ID would pay for itself by reduced fraud, privacy, inclusivity, civil liberties and a modern streamlined state. I believe in all of those things. Thank you.
So I was just going to let this play on for a little bit, but he's annoyed me, so I do have to rant about it. So he makes the argument that all of the public's very valid concerns are nothing more than practical issues which are easily solved by strict legislation. The problem is that the vast majority of this country do not trust this government to put in place secure legislation, or that it or a future government would not remove such limitations in the future. After all, the public have said no to this, and are still being told that it will go ahead regardless, which in and of itself proves the point that this government cannot be trusted. It's also the fact that this was never in its manifesto. I will also remind you as well that this is still the same government that gave its word the day after it was elected that it would not be putting digital IDs in place, and yet here we are, once again they've gone back on their word. Now, the second point I'd like to make is that now we have an MP telling us how this will be useful for the NHS, so that they can easily access our information. All the while we have Starmer & Co trying to convince us that digital ID will have very narrow applications. They don't seem to realise that every time they open their mouths, they do nothing but confirm that this was never and will never be for a singular purpose. This is being designed from the outset to have expansion in mind. That one is obvious.
The ramping up of facial recognition. We've got 30 arrests a day for social media posts. We're getting rid of trial by jury in most cases. And we've also got children being radicalised in our schools by left-wing teachers. And now this government are trying to force digital ID onto us all. And the excuse that they're using, Sir Edward, is that it will stop illegal migrants from working. Now, if the Prime Minister was really serious about stopping illegal migrants from working, then he would detain and deport every single illegal migrant that crosses the English Channel. But of course he won't. This is a gimmick. It's a pathetic attempt by a weak Prime Minister who has lost total control. Over 5,000 of my constituents signed this petition, and they do not want this government poking their noses into their private lives. My constituents are not illegal migrants. They did not break into this country. They are decent, hard-working people whose fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers fought in 2 world wars to secure our freedoms. And every single working person in Ashfield is now going to be penalised because of the failures of this government. You don't need a digital ID to work in this country. You need a national insurance number backed up with a driving licence, a passport or some photo ID. And my message to the government, Sir Edward, is quite clear. You allow undocumented men into our country with no ID at all. You pick them up and place them in luxury hotels with no ID at all. You then give them a free asylum claim and free legal aid with no ID at all. Yet you are ordering my constituents in Ashfield to get digital ID, and then you have the cheek to call us fascists. That's what they do. So just leave my constituents alone and concentrate on clearing up the mess that you lot created.
It's not a good one. Now, the arguments for this are that it will help tackle illegal working, but sadly the evidence doesn't stack up. Across Europe, nations with long-standing ID card systems, Germany, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, Greece, haven't seen reductions in irregular migration as a result of ID cards. In fact, some have larger shadow economies than our own. Now, Estonia, the poster child of digital ID, actually has a bigger underground economy than Britain. So assuming that this new system will somehow suddenly make rogue employers obey the law when they've ignored the paper checks for some time is just for the birds. Now, the real fear here is that argument aside, we'll actually be building an infrastructure that can follow us, link our most sensitive information and expand state control over all of our lives. And the Minister must understand why people are concerned. This doesn't arrive in a vacuum. It sits alongside a worrying pattern. The accelerated rollout of facial recognition, attempts to weaken end-to-end encryption and data laws that strip away privacy protections. And we must remember, Britain has no constitutional right to privacy. Parliament can, in a single vote, grant or remove protections that people in other democracies take for granted. So when we think of building a nationwide ID system capable of linking health records, education data, housing history, even information about crimes that people have suffered, we should stop. Because once that architecture exists, any future government could misuse it and we would have very little power to stop them. Now, we've already... Yes, I will give way.
Thank you. My constituents in Stratford-on-Avon are deeply concerned as well. Millions of people would need to rely on a government-built identity tool to access work and services. Does the honourable member accept that the risks of data and privacy breaches and errors remain considerable?
Yes, I completely agree with the Honourable Lady. We've already seen the consequences of reckless data sharing already. Migrant victims of domestic abuse, rape and trafficking have all too often been frightened to report crimes because police forces routinely pass their information on to immigration officers. The harm is real, the offenders go unpunished and communities are less safe. And even if we set aside the civil liberties concerns, there's a basic practical problem here. UK governments of all stripes don't have a good track record of keeping our data safe. Serious cyber incidents are rising year on year. Critical institutions from the British Library to the Legal Aid Agency to the One Login platform have already been criticised for major security flaws. And then there's the... Yes, very quickly, yes.
My constituents have also raised some concerns, particularly around cybersecurity. But one of the examples that I have is that one of my members was told by the DWP that they were defrauding the system for child benefit when they were not, because they had data stolen. And so I'm concerned that potentially our current government systems need to be far better so that you could demonstrate, if such a thing happened, that you were the genuine holder of that data. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Lady is spot on. We've all got constituency stories that replicate her experience. Now, finally, there's the question of exclusion. As we've heard, millions of people in Britain don't have reliable digital access. Millions more don't have the basic digital skills required to navigate systems like this. So introducing mandatory digital ID risks shutting people out of work, out of housing, out of healthcare and out of public services. So today, I urge the Minister, for the sake of our rights, our safety and our democracy, drop this plan.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It's a privilege to serve under your chairship. I thank the petitioner, Mr Sutcliffe, and the Honourable Member for Keighley and Ilkley for opening this debate. The issue of digital identification has certainly added to my postbag in recent months. Many of my constituents' concerns are real, legitimate and understandable. Issues like data security, the cost of the scheme, the potential for infringements of the right to liberty, the creation of a papers, please society, the chances of ID theft and fraud, concerns as to the accessibility for all, as we have 1.5 million who are digitally excluded in this country. 6% of the population, I won't at the moment, 6% of the population do not have access to smartphones. Pensioners, the disabled, the homeless could be particularly affected. I believe it's vital that the Minister and the Government listen carefully to these concerns and that they are heard during the public consultation, which I know begins in the new year. I'll be making my representations and I would urge my constituents to do so. But I do want to make 2 points about why I do, in principle, support the idea of digital identification. First of all, I believe that a digital credential does have the potential for making an individual citizen's day-to-day life easier and more convenient. In a world where we already pay digitally, bank digitally, travel digitally, book and manage GP appointments digitally, file our tax returns digitally, and access many public service digitally, the argument for secure, universal digital credentials to replace multiple forms of verification is highly appealing. And more secure than many citizens' existing password systems. My dad would remember his early attempts at passwords such as password 123, later improved to sausages 123 with a capital S for added security. I'll just press on with this point, but my important point, I think, the most important point here is that that digital ID will, I do believe that digital ID will strengthen right to work checks. One reason why this is important is to fight back against the epidemic of organised crime we're seeing across our country. I was in one high street in my constituency a couple of weeks ago where 3 vape and tobacco shops have sprung up over the last few months, selling £5 packets of cigarettes, which are obviously illegal. And I was told that it takes HMRC, trading standards and the police to shut one of these down. And even when they do that, it reopens in a few hours. And even so we should be making it easier for the state to immediately verify a person's right to work, especially where there are reasons where if the police need to probe the right to work, they have no ability to do that on the spot. And we need to be making it easier for the state to check rights to work at present.
For giving way. Does he realistically think that mandatory ID would stop these problem shops on the high street?
Yeah, if it's possible for the police to verify whether a person has right to work in that moment, that will assist. The details are not there, but I'm making the point that it's being open to consultation. I'm not here to defend the position of the government. I'm here to say that in principle, the position has not been set out because they are consulting on it. But to come back to this point, because it's really, really important and it's not being engaged with at all by the party opposite. If the police do not have access to right-to-work data at the moment, it makes it harder to close down these entities. And nobody's explained that there is a power because there simply isn't.
Thank the honourable member. I thank the honourable member for giving way. Is he proposing that the police have the right to demand the access?
We don't want this and we will not comply. You can have this.
Is he proposing that the police have a right to demand access to the digital ID to prove right to work on the spot?
The messenger must remove this person immediately. Don't just stand there.
I must have misunderstood. I think he just asked for the police to have the right to demand the digital ID on the spot. Therefore, papers, please.
Yep.
Obviously, the state should, in that scenario, where there's already a basis to look further. But look, I'm not trying to say that this scheme is entirely fine. I've started off this speech by identifying the legitimate concerns of my constituents and many other people. And it is vital that we look at the details of everything that is proposed, so that ultimately we have a consultation that's listened to concerns that have been expressed. So the policy ends up reflecting the positive benefits that I think we can get from a system if we can get the details right. Thank you.
So, rant incoming, obviously. So, yet another MP trying to convince us how this is going to make our day-to-day lives even easier. Now, I know this is going to come as such a shock to so many of you out there, but sometimes easier is not safer. Sometimes when I want to make a bank transaction, the bank will call me and ask me for a code. And they're not doing that to try and make my life harder or to be an inconvenience. It's just purely to keep my data and bank account safe. Now, the other thing is that yet again we have an MP trying to justify digital ID by tacking on even more further uses for it. And in his case, maybe the police could ask for it in cases of illegal vape shops. Now, it's this type of ill-thought-out comment that fuels speculation that digital ID will be in the future used for checkpoints and demands from the police to access it. And that angers me a great deal, frankly, as at the end of this video you'll see Labour's spokesman try to call out all of these concerns as misinformation and all-out lies, when in actual fact it's hard not to speculate when we see ministers rubbing their hands together gleefully at the thought of further control and power. Now, I'd suggest that if they truly do want to combat misinformation and fear-mongering, then the best thing they could do is look into a mirror.
I can't tell you how uncomfortable I feel sitting this side of the chamber. But it is testament to the fact that this is an extremely passionate subject which does arguably need to be heard in the chamber. Digital ID is the biggest step towards a surveillance state this country has ever faced in my lifetime. If any government wants access to every detail of your life, they are the ones who should be feared. We live in a country where the state can't even run a basic IT system without losing data or leaking personal details. It won't last a week before a mountain of sensitive personal data is left at a bus stop in Kent again. I do not trust any government. I certainly do not trust this government. And let us remember, once government gets a new power, it never gives it back. It expands and evolves. Digital ID will not stop at proving who you are. It will creep into travel, banking, housing, benefits, even voting. Today it's voluntary, tomorrow it will be required for security reasons. The day after that, you won't be able to access basic services without it. All for your own good, remember. Britain is supposed to be a country where the government serves the people, not the other way around. A country built on privacy, liberty and trust. British people just want the government to leave them alone and get out of their lives, to build a business, raise a family and live in peace. Digital ID treats every citizen as a suspect. It assumes that the state has the right to look over your shoulder. You defend it by severely limiting the power of the state, not radically expanding it. Abolishing jury trials, cancelling elections, implementing facial recognition, and now this. This incoming dystopian future must be resisted. I will be holding my own protest against this creeping move towards George Orwell's Animal Farm. I will simply not comply. I will not be downloading a digital ID. I urge other MPs to commit to do the same. The solution is obvious. I'll just have to reinvest in a Nokia. I preferred the simplicity of it anyway. The sound people of Great Yarmouth do not want digital ID. Thank you.
I am completely against digital ID. It is expensive, it is intrusive, and it will be completely ineffective. This was not in the Labour Party's 2024 election manifesto, so this is not something that anyone has voted for. Putting that to one side, this Labour government do not seem to understand why it is needed or what it is for. The Prime Minister initially claimed this was an essential part of cracking down on illegal migration. But illegal migrants are making long, dangerous crossings over the Channel. I hardly think the requirement for a digital identification card is going to deter them. Realising that argument was not persuading anyone, the government now claims it is about simplifying access to government services. Government services do need to be simplified, but we do not need digital ID to achieve that. But whatever the actual reasons behind this policy, inevitably we're going to see mission creep. I was particularly concerned to hear the Minister for Children and Families, the Honourable Member for Whitehaven and Workington, say that government is, and I quote, starting with this issue of right to work checks, but there are loads of other applications for digital ID. Sir Edward, what will be next? To access NHS services, to get a school place for your son or daughter, or even potentially to go to the pub. This policy puts the personal data of all our constituents at risk. It would be a honeypot for cyber criminals and foreign state actors at a time when we are under increasing threat. Sir Edward, I would implore this government for once to listen to the people. Listen to the genuine and principled concerns of people across this House today. There is no need for digital ID. People don't want it, and the government has no mandate to introduce it. It fundamentally changes the relationship between the state and its citizens. We must say no to digital ID. It must be scrapped.
Broader point. Since the announcement of digital ID in late September, there has been much misinformation and a lack of information, leading to two things. Firstly, people are left without a clear understanding of how digital ID will be used and why this modernisation is important. Secondly, and more worryingly, some people have been left fearing the worst, that digital ID will be used for surveillance, tracking and authoritarian crackdown, rather than the positive case, as the government suggests, for enabling people to start work more quickly and having better control of our borders, and for people's own convenience. Now, Chair, my 18-year-old son shares my youthful looks, so he's glad of his digital proof of age because it lets him go to the pub now that he's at university without any issues. And my younger son would have welcomed digital ID this weekend when he was turned away from a cinema because he couldn't prove that he was over 15.
So the only reason I put this woman in the video is because she irritated me just that much, and because the points she's trying to make are utterly pointless. I am not going to have a digital ID just because you cannot convince your sons to take a passport with them so that they could prove to retailers, cinemas, etc. of how old they are. In fact, most people do that without needing any prodding. If you remember to take your phone, take your passport too, especially if you may be asked for your ID at the door. Again, it's not that difficult. And if they do not have a passport, then perhaps you could show them as their mother how they can apply for a citizen card. Something which is accepted by retailers all across the UK and is even recognised by the Home Office.
Why are they needed when we already have secure ways to identify ourselves? This is being pushed under the facade of security. The cost to the taxpayer would be prohibitive. This system would be incredibly vulnerable to hacking. These direct quotes from my constituents get to the heart of the point. This is unnecessary, it's overreach, vulnerable and expensive. Nearly 5,000 people in South Northamptonshire signed the petition to oppose the government plans for digital IDs. Now, this government really is the living embodiment of that famous phrase, those are my principles, and if you don't like them, well, I have others. Firstly, they sold this as a means of tackling illegal migration. Now, that principle has barely been mentioned in recent weeks. Now, digital IDs will become the requirement for right-to-work checks in the UK, which may require children as young as 13 to be involved. Talk about the creeping hand of the state. If time permitted, I would happily take an intervention from any member on the other side, where it was in the Labour manifesto that this would be included. Or if any member of the government could actually tell us how much this scheme would cost. But I'll also save them the trouble, because it didn't and they don't know. Yes. The OBR have said that there has been no specific funding identified for this, and it is forecast to cost £1.8 billion over the next 3 years. We've got a government drowning in the amount of budget leaks and accidentally releasing prisoners left, right and centre. So how can it be trusted to create a system of ID? Yes. Any such system requires absolute buy-in from all of our constituents. And we can see that the very reason we are having this debate today is because they haven't secured that buy-in. This is a really dangerous gimmick from the government. The devil is in the detail, and without that detail, the devil is at play, and the British public will pay.
And 4,500 constituents of mine signed the petition, and I thank all of them, especially the 3 million across the country who made sure that their voice is heard today. There is a fundamental issue here, but before I address that, I just want to address the point the lady before me, the honourable lady before me made, and a number of members opposite. There is no system in the world that will be secure enough to protect data. my constituency is the home of Jaguar Land Rover. The reality is, and we have to be honest with our constituents about that, and we live in a current system, and I say this to the former tech minister, the former minister of tech and digital economy that looked at this. We live in a current system where there is a voluntary system, so we voluntarily give our data up. The fundamental issue here is that consent is being taken away, a point that was made by my honourable friend for keeping it. Yes, I'll keep it.
I'm grateful, since he makes an important point here. But are we not at risk of ignoring another threat, and that is from the government itself? It's not that long since the Police Service of Northern Ireland published the data of every serving officer and member of staff. People had to leave their homes as a result of that. Once you allow the state to aggregate your data, is that sort of thing not inevitable?
Well, I think my friend makes a very valid point, and I think we have to take that into consideration. But the Minister won't be able to give anyone that satisfaction that they deserve, and that's why many of our constituents are so upset about it. But let's be very, very clear about this. The reason we're here, the fundamental issue has been that there was a beleaguered Prime Minister who rolled this out as nothing more than a gimmick in a way to stop the boats. But the fact of the matter is, since the party opposite came into government, we've had 62,000 illegal crossings, and there is already ID in place. None of that stopped it. Digital ID won't do that, and that gimmick has not fooled voters. It did not fool the 3 million people who have signed this petition. They can see clearly through this. So what we require first and foremost is honesty. That's what our constituents require, because it won't stop the boats. And the member for Folkestone and Hyde made a point which I did want to address, which he said about these shops selling illegal vapes, etc. Look, there's IDs and mechanisms in place already, and it's happening. Digital ID won't stop that. What he was arguing for, whether he knew it or not, was that the police can have overarching intervention into private accounts, and the private individuals. I'll happily take an intervention if he wants to into those. That's the only way that he will be able, that the police will be able to intervene and do that. What they need to do is investigate, like they always do.
Yeah. I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. My specific example was where you have a £5 packet of cigarettes. It's obviously unlawful, and the police have no power at all to demand right-to-work checks in that situation. Why is the party opposite opposing that as a principle? Well, let me address that point. The problem he poses is not solved by digital ID, and I fundamentally disagree with him on that, because when those people sell those illegal cigarettes, HMRC already have the power to investigate, as do the police, which is why the government was lauding the fact that there were raids just a few months ago and closing down those shops. So he's creating a straw man argument that is not solved by digital IT. Sir Edward, let's be under no illusion about this. This opens the door to tyranny. This is whether it's tyranny today or tyranny tomorrow. The Minister cannot confirm that a future government won't take advantage of this. A future Labour government, perhaps, if that is even possible. And the reality of this, it reframes the relationship between the individual and the state, as a point that has already been made by a number of members. I'm going to make some progress if it's okay. They've already been made, that it fundamentally reframes the relationship between the individual and the state. This turns us into a papers
please society. It ensures that the individual has to prove their innocence. They have to prove why they are, not on the responsibility is shifted away from the state to prove why that individual needs to, why that individual in essence is innocent until proven guilty. So, Edward, I went to Estonia. I was the Minister for Tech and Digital Economy. I saw their systems, and I have to say, I came away with a very, very different conclusion. Their system works for them because they have the Russians on their border. They may, in the situation of an invasion, they may have to pick up sticks and move it over. I won't take any more interventions. They have to pick up sticks and move all their records over. That's why digital ID works for them, even though they have one of the largest black economies in the world, even though they've had data breaches, and it's been quite significant in the way that they do it. We have a much more complex economy. We have a much more complex society. Mandatory digital ID doesn't work for them. And I'll finish on this point. Time and time again, I'm asked what this government stands for. The last few weeks and months have been absolutely telling. The cutting of jury trials, the introduction of mandatory digital ID, the arresting of comedians for errant tweets. Why is this government, I asked this minister, why is this government so afraid of the British citizen and the British individual living their lives freely and with liberty?
So now for the last two closing arguments, one from Josh Simons and the other from Robbie Moore. Robbie Moore has been a pleasure to listen to. Josh Simons, well, good luck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Can I first thank the honourable member for Keighley and Ilkley for bringing this important debate today, the first of many to come, I hope, and including future debates in the Chamber. Can I apologise also to the member for Chester South and Eddisbury for having to step out briefly during her speech. I will check the record and make sure I'm across all of what she said. Can I also thank honourable members from all sides for the thoughtful and respectful manner in which they've spoken in this debate. I will reference some of the contributions during my speech, but I won't take interventions as I've got limited time and a lot of important questions which I will endeavour to answer. I've got 11 minutes, I'm told. And to close, I want to do three things as I endeavour not to be hapless. First, to explain why we want to build this new national digital credential and the principles that will guide us as we do so. Second, to debunk some of the nonsense and myths surrounding this debate. And third, to make some commitments about how I, as the Minister, and we as a government will work with you and your constituents going forward. So let me start with why we're doing this. So often, my constituents in Makerfield, in Wigan, come to me with stories about how they have to fight against the system to do things that should be easy. The social care or send system, registering for a school place or ordering a new bin, paying taxes or accessing benefits, opening a bank account or buying a home. When millions of working people feel exhausted by making their household finances work or dealing with antisocial behaviour in their town, the last thing they need is to feel passed from agency to agency, call centre to call centre, and from one form to the next. It does not have to be this way. All over the world, countries have introduced national digital credentials that give people more control over their public services and ensure that everyone can access those services more easily. It puts the state in your pocket like everything else we do online. Banking, shopping, organising community events, supporting our kids at school. And while the Government Digital Service has done phenomenal work over the last decade, the UK needs a step change to make the state and public services work harder for you to fit around you instead of forcing you to fit around them. Labour governments have a proud history of transforming our state and making it serve ordinary people. After the Second World War, the government built new public services like the NHS from the ground up. Harold Wilson grasped the white heat of technology to modernise the state. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown brought public services into the 21st century. Now we are doing the same, building the digital foundation of the British state and public services for decades to come. And I'm proud that we're building this vital public good for our country, not outsourcing it and not leaving it to private companies. Done right, it can leave a legacy we will be proud of in the years ahead. But done right, as several members have said, is vital. And my job is to make sure that we do it right. And that's why, since becoming the junior minister responsible for this, I've introduced three clear principles that will guide the system we build. First, inclusive. We will leave no person and no place behind. This is a public good, so it must be universally accessible. The people most excluded from our society, whether digitally or because they've not had a passport, are those we will work hardest to reach. We are under no illusions that this is a great challenge. It will take a lot of hard work and a massive digital inclusion drive. But don't forget that the status quo, I will not, is this. I will not. I've got loads more to cover. Millions of people right now are digitally excluded. And that is not a status quo that we are prepared to accept. We will need help to meet this challenge. Civil society, businesses, trade unions and community groups across the UK will be our partners. And that is why we are consulting on how to do this. If we get this right, we will empower the most vulnerable. People experiencing homelessness, the elderly, people with special needs, but also veterans or people without access to the internet. This programme will empower them because we will invest resources to reach and to include them. They will not be left behind anymore. Our second principle, secure. He will not. We are working with the UK's leading national security experts, including the National Cyber Security Centre, to build a system with cutting-edge protections against cyber attacks and identity fraud. But let me be specific. We are not creating a centralised master database.
I will not accept that. He's told you he will not. Yeah, go on then.
The Minister has to speak, because by my understanding he has to speak until 1929 to give the proposer of the motion 1 minute to respond. Could the Chair clarify, please?
Well, yeah, we're running quite well at the moment, so we will be finishing completely at 7:30, but the Minister who brought it forward is wanting to wind up, which he has a right to do, of 1 minute. So you have got a bit longer if you need that.
I was told by the Chair I have 11 minutes and I've got
13.
About 10 more minutes of speech, and I will not be taking intervention, so you can sit down and stop asking. If we get this right, we will empower the most vulnerable people, those experiencing homelessness who are currently left behind. We will not accept that status quo. And this leads me to the second principle, which is that the National Cyber Security Centre will work with us closely to implement cutting-edge protections against cyber attacks and identity fraud. And I want to be specific about what exactly that means. We are not, as many members have asked, creating a centralised master database. The new system will be federated. Specifically, here's what that means. There will be strict legal firewalls about what information can be shared where, and a strong principle of data minimisation. People will have more control over their data in this system than they have now, because people will be able to actively control what information is shared about them and by who. As the member for St Austell and Newquay said, in other countries around the world, like Finland or Estonia, citizens are massively more empowered to control their data, and their consent is placed at the centre, he will not, of the system. And that
right to speak, like everyone else has been given the right to speak. He does not have to take interventions. That is not something that needs to be done.
Placing their consent at the centre of the system, and that is what we will build here in the UK. That takes me to our third principle. It will be useful. I want to build a credential that our constituents want to have, because having it makes their lives easier. In our economy and our society, technology has dramatically improved how we go about our daily lives. I want government to have the tools to move at the same pace. Whether it's applying for a new passport, accessing support for your children, or proving who you are for a job, the state should be working as hard as possible to make these things easy for you, not making you do the hard work. Our consultation will give the public the opportunity to have their say about how they'd like to be able to use this credential and what kind of future public services they would like to see. I want to build a system that helps people with the daily struggles they tell us about and not the system that Whitehall thinks is best. Now, there's also a lot of nonsense flying about in this debate. Some myths that we have failed to rebut and some outright lies. So following a letter from the member for Hartlepool, the second thing I would like to do this evening is briefly debunk some of those myths. First, this programme will involve a massive digital inclusion drive, rejecting the status quo where millions are excluded digitally and excluded from having IDs, investing resources and time to ensure everyone can access the online world and digital public services through post offices and libraries, physical spaces in communities up and down the United Kingdom. Second, nobody will be stopped and asked for this new digital credential by the police. No card, no papers, no police.
Go ahead.
Chair, is it in order for the Minister to indicate that contributions in this debate contained lies?
I have to say, I couldn't hear him say that, mainly because everyone else was making so much noise, like now. I did not hear him say that.
I wasn't saying that contributions are, I was saying that things out there, and to clarify, I was not saying that contributions from other members were lies. I was saying there are lies out there in the country about this system, and I'd like to put that on record. We want a system that people want to use to make their lives easier, so they no longer have to fill forms multiple times or fight against agencies to transfer information. Third, as I've said, there is and there will be no centralised master database created. The new system will be federated, meaning data will stay where it already is, stored securely and separately, only using the minimum data necessary for ID verification and information sharing. Privacy-preserving questions and answers will be communicated across datasets with strict firewalls between them, enshrined in law and only where people consent. So people will control what data is shared and where, like they do in other countries, more control than they have now. Fourth, this system will be a public good. I want to build this system because it will benefit ordinary people, not because I'm under the grip of some international elite or a globalist diktat, as someone said earlier, which is quite the anti-Semitic trope to throw at a Jewish minister. Yesterday, I was in the pub in Hindley talking to a bloke who was trying to transfer basic information from Bolton Council to Wigan Council. I want that to be easier, to make the state work harder for him and not the other way around. That is why we're doing it. Fifth, there will be legislation establishing the credential on which Parliament will vote. Parliament will control what this credential can be used for. We will establish a clear legal framework to prevent scope creep. Our goal is to make life easier for people and give people more security and control over the data than they have now. That is the test I will set. Sixth and finally, we are a proud liberal parliamentary democracy. We will never have a social credit system. We will not be tracking anyone's life. Existing data protection laws will apply. Your use of gambling sites won't be allowed to impact your entitlement to healthcare or your speeding ticket affect who you can marry, as in China, a country with no elections, no parliament and no rule of law. I wrote a book about making sure that democracy controls data and not the other way around. That is what I intend to do. Thirdly, and finally, tonight, I want to end by making a few promises to members in this room and to anyone in the public who is watching. The consultation, which will be launched in the new year, will be a major public undertaking. I am determined that we will engage in a different kind of way. I will be travelling up and down the country to listen to people and to hear how they want this credential to work and how they think it can make their lives easier. As with all public goods, we cannot build or roll this out alone. We want to work with communities, not do this to communities. Working arm in arm with grassroots groups, digital inclusion organisations, local authorities, combined authorities, mayors, civil society, trade unions, businesses, small and large, across the United Kingdom. If you, or your organisation, or your constituents are in any of those camps and would like to get involved, I would encourage you to get in touch. Chair, I understand the anxiety of many honourable members in this room and many members of the public. In fact, I share some of those anxieties. I know that it's my job and the government's job to persuade. Liberal parliamentary democracies around the world have or are developing a national digital credential. Australia, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, France, Germany, India, the list goes on. We will take a principled approach to building this new system, inclusive, secure and useful. These principles are non-negotiable, and how we apply them will be led by our major public consultation next year. Chair, my background is in technology and AI. Part of why I came into politics is that so often the way ordinary people encounter technologies is determined solely by private imperatives and not the public good. I do not want the future of our state and our economy to be driven by a desire to addict our children to TikTok videos or pornography, but by a willingness to roll up our sleeves and do the hard graft of building infrastructure that will last for generations. That is what a new national digital credential is, a vital public good, and I am proud that this government will build it.
Robbie Moore to wind up, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And there we have it. This is how the government of the day is going to be engaging with people. Stating from the dispatch box that they are willing to listen but yet not take one intervention. And may I remind the Minister that members of Parliament in this House have been elected to represent their constituents, and over nearly 3 million petitioners who have signed this petition and not to have taken one intervention dealing with the matters that they have brought to them in this House is not only embarrassing for the Minister but completely discourteous to the members of Parliament in this chamber. What a disgrace. Colleagues have spoken, and I want to thank members who have spoken on behalf of their constituents, and I want to thank the 3 million people who have signed this petition, because they have demonstrated that this is not something that they want this country to move forward with. It is expensive, it is unwanted, and it is intrusive. And Madam Chairman, this is not something that was included within the Labour Party manifesto. It is not something that was promoted, that would be brought forward by this government. The voice of this chamber has been heard. It's just incredibly disappointing that the Minister did not have the courtesy to reflect that in his remarks.
Now, you will be pleased to hear that this is my final rant of the video, and then the video ends. And I'm really sorry that this has been so long. It's just that the debate itself is nearly 4 hours, and I did want to, although make a short version, I wanted to keep the original integrity of the debate. And hopefully I've managed to do that. That'll be up to you to decide. Now, I do have a few comments to make in regards to Josh Simon's final closing statement. Firstly, I do take umbrage at the fact that Keir Starmer did not show up. I believe that, seeing as he's the one who announced this so disastrously to the public, he at least owed us that. Now, I'm not surprised he didn't show up, I'm just disappointed that he didn't. Secondly, and this is just a small point, but the fact that Josh did not take any interventions from other ministers. Now, whilst other MPs were speaking, they were capped at 3 minutes, and yet they mostly did take interventions. He had 11 minutes and refused. To me, that is just in poor form. Now, one of the things that he did do was promise once again that this will be a secure system. But that's just it. You cannot promise that because it's impossible, and that's not my opinion, but the opinion of many in the tech field. People who have spent their entire lives developing the world's best and most secure networks have admitted that there is no such thing as a 100% secure system. And Labour has an atrocious track record. They've had a lot of leaks, including those recently with OBR leaking Reeves's budget, for example. I don't trust Labour with the information it already has on me, let alone with more. Now, yes, he denied that there will be a centralised database, but if that's the case, then digital ID will be utterly pointless and unable to function in the ways that Labour have been promising, although it's hard to decipher from them which ways it will actually work because they won't give us solid information. He also claimed, although then backtracked, that there were many lies out there about the system, and here's the problem, the biggest problem, and one that encompasses most of the issues that I've had throughout this video. The reason that there's been so much speculation to begin with is that there's been a total lack of information from Labour in regards to some things, whilst Labour MPs have speculated themselves at all the other uses that digital ID could have for the public in the future, and that includes many Labour MPs during this very debate. In fact, even Prime Minister Starmer has pondered publicly how it could be useful for renters, collecting benefits and banking, whilst also telling people that they're wrong to believe that digital ID will be used for such things. This government is incapable of making a simple, cohesive statement on what digital ID will actually be, and I argue that's because they either do not know or they don't want us to know. Now I'm going to leave the video here. I love you all very much. Please take care, and I shall see you all in the next video. Mwah. Bye-bye.